Legato playing, let's talk about it. Particularly the technique of hammering on and pulling off the string. That's going to be our focus for today. We're going to be talking particularly about an exercise that'll be very effective for that and very similar to a previous exercise we did on building stretchability in your hand. If you don't already know, a hammer-on is essentially taking, let's say, your first finger here on the 5th fret, and then if you want to play the 7th fret with your 3rd finger, you're going to do what's called a hammer-on, where you kind of have this sort of anchor point with one finger staying put, and then the other finger is going to be hammering the finger on the string to actually sound it out without having to actually pick the string. And then a pull-off is doing the inverse motion of that, where you're going to be pulling right off of it, right? So hammer on, pull off. And how that relates to legato playing is essentially this fluid style of playing that doesn't require much picking at all. In terms of how it relates to guitar playing, it's a very smooth, very liquid style where rather than picking every single note, you know, you're gonna be going. You know, so it's mostly your fretting hand doing the work as opposed to your picking hand. So picking hand gets to take a back seat with the legato stuff. So the hammer-on and pull-off technique is obviously very important for that. Not just for legato playing, but it's something that you kind of really need since we're going to be relying mostly on our fretting hand to trigger the string to sustain out so we don't have to worry about the pick. So for this little exercise, it's going to be really similar to the one building the stretchability that we went over, right? Where we have our first finger on the 5th fret of the high E string here. And what we're going to be doing is what's called a trill. So a trill is just this rapid fire back and forth between two notes. And when it's done on the guitar, it tends to involve the hammer-on and pull-off technique. So for example, here's an example of a trill between the 5th fret and the 6th fret on the high E string. So that's what a trill is. And it can be a fast trill or a slow trill. You know, it really doesn't matter. A trill is a trill is a trill is a trill. So we're gonna start by trilling our 1st and 2nd fingers. So you take your 2nd finger, like I just did there, and what we're gonna do is we're going to pick the 5th fret of the high E string just once. And we want our 2nd finger to do the rest of the work to keep the string sustaining as long as necessary, right? Without having to pick the string again. So we're hammering on, right? So it doesn't have to be like a really intense, like hard-hitting motion. It's just, you want to find a sweet spot, right? Because every guitar is different, every guitar is set up different, what gauge strings you're using, all that stuff, you want to adapt to it to make sure that your hammer-on technique is accurate, right? While at the same time being not, you know, too much for you. Like you don't want to put too much effort or exert yourself too much, right? So you want to find the sweet spot. What's the right amount of force to get it to sound out without having to, like, not trying to knock your finger on the fret so hard that you'll go through the fretboard or something, right? So you're gonna find that sweet spot. Another great thing about legato playing is it encourages you to play with more finesse, right? So when we're doing this trill, find that sweet spot. So you're doing that hammer-on, right? And then when you're pulling off, you're literally doing, I'm exaggerating here, but you're doing a pull-off motion. You're not just releasing your finger, right? You're not just going like, because then you lose a lot of the sustain, right? So you want to go, because pulling it off kind of triggers the string again and allows it to continue sustaining. So what I'm doing is a hammer on, right? And then it's like a little flicking motion. But again, find the sweet spot. You don't want to be flicking it too hard. Just enough to get the sound you need, right? And then I'm using my palm on my fretting, or my picking hand, sorry, to mute the strings, so I'm only hearing the high E string here, okay? And we're gonna do that for, like, you know, let's say 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we move on to our 3rd finger, doing the same thing. We're gonna be doing the same trill, only now on between the 5th and the 7th frets, right? And it's the same old story, right? As far as the technique of hammering on, pulling off, finding that sweet spot, right? and then 4 counts, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and then now we move on to our pinky. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're gonna be climbing up with the fingers in our fretting hand like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once we've reached our pinky, we're actually going to descend the order, and we're gonna go back down to our 3rd finger. So let's say we're starting with our pinky. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so we're walking it up and back down. But here's the important thing. You wanna just pick the string once. Your pick hits the string just once, and you want your fingers to do the rest, right? So once. You don't want to have to pick the string again to get it sustaining. That's where those hammer-ons and pull-offs come in. So that's the benefit, right, with building that technique, especially for legato playing, because with legato playing, the whole point, especially on guitar, is to minimize the amount of times you're picking the string. So we're doing that on the high E string, but this can obviously be, taken across all the strings. So you can do it on the B string, because obviously legato playing isn't just limited to one string, right? Or hammer-ons and pull-offs for that matter, And as you start getting up past the unwound strings, right? Past like the G string here, we get to the D string, it's gonna feel different on our fingers, right? Obviously, because we're dealing with wound strings. And they're thicker. So the way we hammer on and pull off is gonna feel a little different, right? So you wanna get good at, and I've said this before, it doesn't matter where you're at on the fretboard or what string you're on, you wanna be able to employ the technique that you need wherever it is, right? When you want it, on demand, right? So make sure to cover all of those strings. So you'll do 4 counts. So if you have your metronome going, it'll just be 4 counts of each finger, right? Going up and down, and then you switch strings. And then you go down to the B string, then down to the G string, D string, A string, low E string, right? And then once you do that, kind of take inventory, right, of what felt the easiest, which will most likely be the unwound strings, right? And if the wound strings felt a little harder to like hammer on and pull off the same way, you might want to change up your strategy a little bit. It doesn't have to be by much, but when you're pulling off, let's say on the wound strings, it might require a little bit more of a, let's say a little bit harder of a flicking motion to really get that, to grab that wound string and then flick it off like that. And as far as the speed of the trills, right? If trilling is something that you don't, really do a whole lot, so it's new to you and it can be exhausting at first. So one thing you want to do is pretend like you're sounding out a siren, right? Where it's like, wee woo, wee woo, wee woo, right? Start slow, right? It's totally fine. In fact, I encourage you start slow. So you start slow and precise, right? So that siren, approach is the best place to start, I'd say, if you're new to trills, right? Or if it's not something you've really spent a lot of time on, right? So just think in terms of like a siren, Now, unlike the stretch exercise, where it was more just about, swatting your fingers on the fretboard and then just kind of muting your guitar signal because it's not about what you're actually playing. With this exercise, it is about what you're playing. You really want to make sure that the notes are clear. And remember, you're only picking the string once. So you got to make sure that you can hear clearly that whatever string you're on when you're trilling is just continuing on evenly and loud enough so that you don't even have to worry about picking the string. And once you get comfortable with this exercise, you can actually apply it to pretty much anything that you play. Let's say if it's like a single note run or like a scale run, right? Let's say you want to go up the A minor pentatonic using hammer-ons and then go down using pull-offs. You can totally do that, So you're picking the string once to trigger it, right? But you got to make sure that your other finger is performing the hammer-on so that you're not having to pick the string twice, just for practicing this particular technique. And then when you descend, same thing, just focus on picking the string once. Or if it's like a 3-note per scale thing, let's say if it's 3 notes, you just want to pick the string once, right? And then let your fingers do the rest, whether you're ascending or descending. You know, it really comes down to focusing on minimizing the amount of time that you have to pick the strings. Now, there's something to keep in mind here when you're descending when it comes to legato, right? If you're doing pull-offs, it's a little bit easier, right? You can go straight into going into pull-offs without having to even pick the string once. Once you get comfortable enough with it, you can do this, you know? Because you can just hammer on that string and then just let the pull-offs, you know, to kind of do the rest. As opposed to when you're ascending, it gets a little tricky when you're going up the strings because you're having to like trigger the string with a hammer on after having like, you know, once my pinky's here and I go to the next part, there's more likely to be, you know, string noise and stuff like that. So it's not going to be as clean. But if you want to help that, you know, if you don't have like a fret wrap or something, you can do the Eddie Van Halen thing and then just bring your hand over, mute the strings, and then just, you know, it's flashy and it's, you know, it's actually really useful. If you don't have a fret wrap or a scrunchie, you know, you can always just use, you know, the one God gave you. Now this is another exercise that I strongly recommend you track your progress so that you can see how much you've improved, not just in your hammer-on pull-off ability, but in the tone of how you do it, right? Because the whole point is to like let the heavy lifting, let your fretting fingers do the heavy lifting as far as like sounding out and sustaining the string. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're tracking your progress, is not just how comfortable you are with it, which is obviously important. The more comfortable you get with it, the better it's gonna sound, but also to keep track of just how much better it sounds. And an additional bonus exercise you can do with your legato, right, practice, is the spider walk. So you can pick the string just once, and then walk up those fingers, up those 4 frets, and then when you descend, it's especially challenging when you're dealing with all 4 of those fingers, but again, the challenge is part of what makes it so effective. And as far as string noise, you know, in the beginning, you might encounter some, like it still happens to me all the time, as you just heard, you know. So I recommend using what I like to call the stake of your palm, right, as a means of just gently muting the strings, and but making sure that you give way to the strings that you're actually needing to sound out the notes. Because again, this is about sustain with these hammer-ons and pull-offs. But if you're muted, you know, can't really hear it. So you want to find that sweet spot where you're muting all the extra strings so you're not getting any excess string noise, so you can proceed with the exercise, you know, and actually pick the string, right, once per string, and make sure that it's only, you know, the string that you intend to hear that's actually, you know, being heard.